In this video, we're going to be talking about squares and square roots. So to start off, I want you guys to go ahead and copy this table down of the first 12 perfect squares and then the square roots of that. So go ahead and copy that table down. As you're copying, I'm going to just explain a little bit what we mean by perfect squares and what square roots are. Okay, perfect squares are the product or the result that we get when we multiply a number by itself. So 1 times 1 is 1. So 1 is a perfect square. 2 times 2 is 4. So 4 is a perfect square. 3 times 3 is 9. So 9 is a perfect square, and so on. So there are an unlimited number of perfect squares that get extremely large as time goes on. I've only listed the first 12 perfect squares because those are the ones that are the most common. All right, so then you might ask, well, what are square roots? Well, square roots are the roots of a perfect square. So in other words, what are the numbers that we have to multiply together to get the perfect square? So we can see here by this table that 1 is a perfect square. What do you have to multiply together to get 1 by itself? Well, obviously 1 times 1 is itself, is 1. 4, what do we have to multiply together to get 4? 4 is a perfect square. So what do we have to multiply together to get 4? Well, 2 times 2. 9. 9 is a perfect square. What do we have to multiply together by itself to get that 9? 3 times 3, and so on. So there are many, many other numbers that we can find the square roots of, but the square root of a perfect square is always going to be a whole number. And once again, sometimes you're going to, most of the time actually, you're going to need to use a calculator to find out what the square root of a number is, whether it's a perfect square or whether it's not. But it's a good idea to memorize the first 12 or so perfect squares and their square roots. So if you haven't finished copying this table down, go ahead and pause the video and copy these two lists down. All right, so as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, a square root is the inverse of squaring a number. In other words, it undoes, or it's the opposite of squaring a number. And when we do that, every positive number, every positive perfect square number, or even another number, has two square roots. One's a positive and one's a negative. You can see that because, for instance, if you say 3 times 3 is 9, and negative 3 times negative 3 is equal to 9. So the square root of 9 is both a positive 3 and a negative 3. All right? Sometimes we want to find just the positive one. That's called the principal square root. Okay? That's what we're finding most of the time. But occasionally you're going to want to find the negative square root, and that's signified by having this negative sign in front of the square root sign. And it's the thing that's important there is that negative the square root of negative 49 is not the same thing as the negative square root of 49. And the reason for that is that a negative number really has no real square root because you cannot take a negative times a negative and end up with a negative. If you remember from your integers, a negative times a negative is always going to end up as a positive number. All right, it's never going to end up as a negative number. So this This here, this square root of negative 49 is not possible with if you have expressing it as real numbers. Okay? And this paragraph up here just talks about perfect squares, which we've already discussed. All right, so I've got several examples that show what we're talking about. So the square root of 49, well, we know that 7 times 7 is 49, so the square root of 49 is 7, but it's also negative 7, because negative 7 times negative 7 is positive 49. Square root of 25 is 5 and negative 5. Square root of 100 is 10 and negative 10. All right, so those are both the principal square roots and then its negative. The principal ones are the positive ones. All right. This next couple examples ask for the principal square root, so it's only asking us to find the positive one. Well, 196 is a number that's not on our list. When we run across a number that's not on our list, we're going to need to use a calculator. And to do that, we just simply plug in, if you see, here's the square root sign right here, okay? So you hit second, and then that gives us a square root, and type in 196, close parentheses, and hit enter, and we end up that, we can see that the square root of, principal square root of 196 is 14. Square root of 64, well, we know already from our list that that is 8. 225 is another number that's not on our list, so we're going to hit second square root of 225 and hit enter, and we find out that principal square root is 15. Sometimes we need to simplify expressions that involve square roots. And to do that, we use the order of operations, which is PEMDAS, or please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. When we do that, if you remember, the P here stands for parentheses, okay? So when we're doing the square roots, everything under the square root symbol is treated as if it were inside parentheses. Parentheses are referred to as grouping symbols. Well, the square root symbol, this square root symbol here, that's also treated as a grouping symbol. All right, so it says to simplify the expression 3 times the square root of 25 plus 4. Well, when we do that, we can see that this is 3 times square root of 25, remember, is 5. We always use the principal square root unless we are told differently by a negative on the outside. Plus 4. 3 times 5 is 15 plus 4, which is 19. If we simplify the expression, the square root of 16 over 4 plus 1/2, 16 divided by 4 is 4, so the square root of 4 plus 1/2, square root of 4 is 2 plus 1/2, and that is just simply 2 and 1/2. And then our last example says simplify the expression square root of 5 plus 11 minus 1. So we add the 5 plus 11, end up with 16. So we have the square root of 16 minus 1. Square root of 16 is 4. 4 minus 1 is 3. So that expression, or yeah, that expression simplifies down to 3. Okay, so that does it for this lesson. Go ahead and make sure that you understand all the notes that you wrote down. If you have any questions, be sure to get in touch with me, and I will see y'all later.